Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is fighting. And so many of us get caught in a pattern of fighting and struggling to survive. And ultimately, that leads us in a fight with life itself and makes it difficult for us to allow life to unfold and present, to be in partnership with life. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your molecules, all your electrons, and creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And now let's press our palms together and vigorously rub your hands together. Feel that tingling, that tickling, the pressure, the temperature, all those sensations. When you stop, allow all of that sensual experience to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning, Rosalind. Good morning. It's so great to be here with you and everybody else who's joining us. I had a brief hiatus. I was in California for a conference called Mega Success, and my intention was to meet some awesome people, which I did, and it was a great adventure. And now I'm back and we're talking about fighting and actually about learning how to stop fighting. This comes about because I did a session with a client yesterday, and they were talking about how they just want to be there, wherever there is already, that they know that their mission is to be a teacher and a healer, and they are going through this passage in life that has been challenging, and they just want it over so they can be where they're meant to be. And I said, this is how you get to where you're meant to be, is by going through what you're going through now, and to stop fighting it, to be able to be present to it, to be able to be learning from it, to be able to be integrating with it. And the interesting thing is that when we stop fighting, and I don't mean surrender, well, surrender may be in a spiritual sense, but I don't mean giving up. When we stop fighting and we start allowing life to be as it is, that's when we start reaching mastery. That's when we start really awakening to what life has to offer us. So let's talk about fighting, because so many of us have relied on being able to be a fighter to survive. That being a fighter or fighting is what got us through in life. And to then abandon that strategy that has perhaps becomes so deeply ingrained is a scary thing. And in the case of this person that I was working with, they said, and it was so powerful, I don't know how not to fight. I don't know how not to. And I think that that's the case for so many of us. And this fight doesn't necessarily look like fists or weapons or physical fighting, but fighting life, fighting the way things are. And I'm not saying not to pursue causes or intentions, um, but this notion of life, this timeline should be different. Like thinking that we know better how life should be than the way it is, right? And I'm not saying to complacently accept injustices. We get to recreate, reimagine our lives, our futures, our potentials. So it might sound like a paradox, but it isn't really. It's when we allow ourselves to find the current in the river of life that we can be more effective, that we can be more expressive of who we are, that we can partner with life rather than treating life as an opponent that we have to overcome. Because guess what? Life is always going to win. There's no way we fight life and win. Good morning, Gia. Good evening, Gia. So wonderful to have you here with us. Welcome, welcome. So we're talking about fighting, and more importantly, we're talking about learning to not fight. And this always goes back to the wisdom prayer. God grant me let's see, how does it go? God grant me the courage to change those things I can. What's the other part? God grant me the wisdom to accept those things I can't. God grant me the serenity to accept those. It's the serenity prayer. So God grant me the serenity to accept those things I cannot change, courage to change those things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. So serenity, God grant me the serenity to accept those things I cannot change. So that means peacefulness as opposed to fighting. So in other words, to allow ourselves to find the current of life. And when we flow with the river, then we have greater potential to be effective, to affect change, to appreciate life. So Rosalind says challenging current positions should be different, wanting to be there instead of here. Perhaps it's a comparison to a past condition. How about if the position trying to be obtained has never been experienced before? Thank you. So in this particular situation, this conversation, I don't know that the situation that they're desiring had ever been experienced. And I think that we are looking to create in the world conditions that we've never experienced. Like we talk about peace on earth. Well, there's never been peace on earth as long as humans have been around, as far as I'm aware. we talk about unity and connection and oneness and all these things that we don't really have a model for. We talk about social justice and equity, and we don't really have a model for it globally. It's not ever been achieved. Humans have warred with each other as long as we remember in history. Anyway, this notion of serenity, in some way it's trust, that we can trust the unfolding of life, that life is happening for me and through me rather than to me. And so to be operating in this place of, okay, it's time for this now. So it's one thing to say, I'm ready, or to prepare ourselves. It's another thing to say, now's the time. And maybe there are points at which we can say, now's the time, and the universe supports us in that. And there are other times when we say, now's the time, and the universe says, not yet, honey, not yet. And in those times, the more we say it's time, it's time, it's time, and I know better than life, the more resistance we're creating, the more opposition we're creating. So it feels like a paradox. It was interesting because in talking to this person, they just could not understand. They didn't have a way to understand what I was saying. And it's so interesting that until we experience, or until we get to a place where we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, sort of thing, the concept of light is completely foreign until there's a glimmer of it. And so this notion of fighting, like that the world is a hostile place, that's where the fighting is coming from. And thinking, I know better, figuring that like we're more intelligent than the universe that's been here for millennia. The incredible hubris of humanity, to believe that we can design genes that are going to be better than nature's genetics, that we can just mix and match because we have some knowledge without the perspective of the ramifications of those kinds of decisions and interventions. So I'm not in any way advocating complacency. And I guess so on some level, this is a razor's edge that we get to walk, that is the interface between complacency, fighting, and flow. It's when we allow what is to be that we can then be responsive. When we recognize and allow ourselves to be present to what is, that we then have the capacity to engage with what is in a dynamic way. And when we are saying that what is shouldn't be, it's a tremendous waste of energy and attention, because what is. Doesn't mean it has to stay that way. Doesn't mean we don't find intervention points. Doesn't mean that we don't take action. It just means that what is in this moment is. And it's not until, like, you cannot use a map to get somewhere if you don't know where you are already. And that's what I mean by what is. It's kind of taking the pulse of the present, and the impatience to have it be some other way is part often of what entrenches us more deeply in the is that we're fighting, if that makes some sense. When we are fighting something, we are perpetuating the thing that we're fighting by creating that opposition. So that's why there's so much more power in looking to create something new, looking to create a new future rather than fighting the old. Because what happens when you fight? The opposition bolsters itself, right? So you create more resistance. If you come at somebody with an aggressive stance, aggression breeds aggression, right? Or enmity. It doesn't usually breed friendship. Not usually. So I think this notion of fighting, it was so powerful to hear this person say, I don't know how to stop fighting. Because I don't think that they realize how they fight at every turn. Like every interaction has a seed for them of conflict. And they were also talking about being tuned to the wrong station on the radio, the frequency radio, right? And so when we're a fighter, everything is a fight. It's like when you're a hammer, everything's a nail, right? And so the foundation of that is life is a struggle. And the world's a dangerous place, and you always have to be defending. And the thing is that this person grew up in an environment where they had to maintain, it was a struggle to maintain themselves and their own awareness. Exactly. So Gia says, even defensiveness is active war. Yeah. So here's the thing, when we're defending, what are we defending against? A real or imagined foe, right? So if you talk to me and I am defensive, what's behind that defensiveness? Is an assumption of opposition, an assumption of otherness, an assumption of the enemy or the opposition. You know, that when even a conversation becomes a debate because of this defensiveness. So carrying that definition of being a fighter, sometimes it is that behavior of being a fighter that has saved our lives, that has allowed us to survive. And therefore, it makes it harder to know when not to fight. I'm not saying there aren't times that maybe fighting is appropriate. There may be times when fighting is appropriate. We can allow for that. But being a fighter from a space of beingness, being a fighter creates fights. It being a fighter, one is always looking for a fight because that's how we engage, right? As a fighter, that's what a fighter does, is fight. And to not know how to not to be unable or unaware of how to not fight, it's being condemned to a life of conflict. And it was so interesting. It's so interesting with this person. I was talking about a possible scenario of I don't know, I was talking about the airline and having to fly. And this person just went off about buying seats, and then people saying, "Oh, could you change seats with me?" after you may have paid for a special seat on the plane. Like, that's the biggest scam ever, as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, because I figure I've got a ticket, they have to find a seat for me. So, I don't have to necessarily buy one, but because they're going to put me in a seat somewhere on the plane. But anyway, that's me. What can I say? Maybe if you're 6'10" and you need extra leg room, it makes sense. I don't, but anyway, so they were getting themselves worked into a lather over this imagined experience of having bought a ticket or bought a seat on the plane and getting really angry about the prospect of somebody asking them if they could switch seats because they have a family member that's sitting somewhere else on the plane. And, it's, if it weren't so painful for them, it would be pretty comical, because this scenario didn't exist. It was a fabricated scenario, and they were getting very upset and angry and aggressive and hostile about these imagined people asking them to change their seat. And they were like, "No, I paid for this, blah, blah, blah." And it was such a perfect example of how if we're a fighter, we look for fights. Like, this whole scenario didn't even exist, and yet here's this person ready to duke it out with some imagined person who's there asking for a seat that they didn't even really have, nor had they really paid for. But there was all this fight that got them all fired up, and all those chemicals that we become addicted to that are parts of different emotional states. So this chemistry set around fighting, it was almost an addiction. So they needed to create this scenario out of nothingness to feed that hunger for that chemical set or something. It was wild. And when we look at that, this person's not alone in doing that. We do this kind of thing to ourselves all the time. Not just with fighting, not just with anger. We do that with sadness, where we look for things to be sad about. Gia says, the more we try to defend ourselves, we protect our insecurities and fear and rage. sad for people dealing with us in the moment, as it may be his or her fault, and we could have been triggered by something from our past. Well, most likely we are triggered from something from our past or by something from our past. That's a lot of what happens, is to be like when we're talking about this fighting pattern. It is a pattern. It's a pattern or a habit of behavior that has been deeply, profoundly conditioned, that has a whole chemical set that goes along with it that we become habituated to. And fear and rage, all of that. You know, if we're afraid, we look for things to be afraid about. There aren't enough of us who are happy that look for things to be happy about. And maybe that's a behavior or a pattern, a habit that we get to cultivate some more. So anyway, fighting, take a look at it. Take a look at it in your life or the pattern in your life. For me, it was depression for years and years, and fighting too, anger, a lot of anger. You know, I would find things to be angry about, and it would feed itself. So Gia says imagination skills over reality any day. Yes, the moment I feel depressive, I start fighting it. Thank God I've been working on it and can let it be. The more I let it be, it fades. Exactly. Exactly, Gia. Thank you so much for that. When you can just let it be, it'll fade. If you're fighting it, you're feeding it fuel. You know, you're giving it all this attention and saying, "Oh, it should be different, and why am I doing this?" and finding all reasons for it, and digging yourself much more deeply into these very dark trenches. So good for you. Instead of fighting it, just let it be, and then you can move on more readily. So congratulations for that. Rosalind says, so it can be a habit of being in a state of anxiousness because that chemical set is what the nervous system is used to. Exactly. So there's a chemical set that's part of this. And in order to shift that chemical set, we have to deliberately find ways to put ourselves into other emotional states that have different physical chemical sets, and to start practicing that so that we can create a new neurological and chemical pattern, as well as an emotional pattern, because it's a cycle. So the emotions create the chemicals then perpetuate the emotions, and it goes on and on. So if we can shift and give ourselves other emotional states, we can be shifting out of that habit. And some habits are, you know, addictions, hard to break. Anyway, that's it for today. It's great to be back with you all. So much love to you and deep appreciation. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to please check out the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network, EWN, One with the Earth, and Enlightened World Living. And until next time, so much love, and I hope